You've spent your whole life trying to be the smartest person in the room. You were taught, conditioned, and trained to believe your intelligence is your greatest asset, the one key that unlocks success, respect, and power. You think winning an argument is gaining ground, and showing off your knowledge is how you establish dominance. But what if I told you that this very instinct, this deep need to be seen as brilliant, isn't your greatest strength but your most profound and fatal flaw? What if the real path to untouchable power isn't in showcasing your intelligence, but in mastering the art of playing the fool? This isn't a call for ignorance. It's a summons to a higher level of strategic thinking, one that the great masters of power have known for centuries. Niccolò Machiavelli, the godfather of political realism, knew the world is a treacherous stage where perception trumps reality. He understood that in the ruthless game of power, the person who seems like a harmless, simple fool can move with a freedom and lethality that the self-proclaimed genius can only dream of. The smartest person in the room is a target, a rival, and a threat. Their intelligence makes others cautious, envious, and defensive. They reveal their weapons with every word, teaching their enemies exactly how to defeat them. The fool, on the other hand, is underestimated. They're dismissed, ignored, and people talk freely right in front of them. While everyone else is posturing and trying to outshine one another, the strategic fool is observing, learning, and mapping the psychological terrain of the battlefield. They let others feel superior, feeding the egos of their rivals, while quietly gathering the intelligence needed to orchestrate their downfall. This is the secret that separates those who temporarily win arguments from those who permanently win the war. It's the difference between fleeting admiration and enduring power. In the next few minutes, you're going to learn why trying to appear smart is the very thing keeping you weak. Why your obsession with being right, with being seen as intelligent, actually makes you predictable, and therefore powerless. And most importantly, how embracing the role of the fool, as Machiavelli understood it, allows you to hide your sharpest weapons behind a harmless smile. By the end, you won't just outthink others, you'll outplay them, while they still believe you're naive. Comment below with the phrase, "I hide my power in plain sight." Let's begin. Rule 1. Mask your brilliance. Let others feel smarter. The first and most fundamental rule in the art of strategic foolishness is a direct insult to everything we've been taught. You have to actively mask your own brilliance to give others the satisfying feeling of being intellectually superior. This is Law 21 from Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power. Play a sucker to catch a sucker. Seem dumber than your mark. The logic is as simple as it is profound. Nobody likes feeling stupider than the person they're dealing with. The ego is a fragile, powerful force, and people's sense of their own intelligence is often central to their vanity. When you accidentally challenge that vanity by appearing too sharp or too quick-witted, you aren't earning their respect, you're putting them on the defensive. You become a threat, a benchmark against which they measure their own flaws. Their immediate subconscious reaction is to get suspicious, hide their true intentions, and find a way to undermine you. By deliberately downplaying your intelligence, you pull off a masterful act of psychological jujitsu. You aren't just avoiding a fight, you're disarming your opponent. When people believe they're smarter than you, their suspicion vanishes. They get comfortable, complacent, and careless. Convinced of their intellectual high ground, they'll never suspect you of having ulterior motives or running a complex strategy. They'll talk more freely, revealing plans, weaknesses, and deep-seated insecurities, all while assuming you're too simple to understand what they're really saying. You become the harmless confidant, the non-threatening subordinate, the likable fool. This disguise gives you unparalleled access to information and an unrivaled freedom to move. While they're busy basking in the glow of their own supposed brilliance, you're quietly laying the foundation for their defeat. This isn't about being dishonest for the sake of it. It's about recognizing that in the game of power, the other person's ego is a tool. By letting them feel smart, you turn their vanity into your most effective weapon. You're not just playing dumb, You're playing the long game, sacrificing the tiny satisfaction of winning a debate for the ultimate prize. A master of this very principle was the Prussian statesman, Otto von Bismarck. In the 1860s, Bismarck was on a mission to unify Germany under Prussia, which meant he had to outmaneuver the Austrian Empire. One of his biggest challenges was securing a treaty with Austria over the Schleswig-Holstein territories. He needed Austria to agree to terms that were subtly, but significantly, better for Prussia. To do this, Bismarck entered negotiations with the Austrian representative, Count Blome. Knowing Blome was a man with a huge ego, Bismarck adopted the persona of a bumbling, disorganized country squire. He presented his arguments in a scattered and confused way, pretending to be ignorant on key details and appearing easily swayed by Blome's seemingly more sophisticated logic. He would ramble, backtrack, and ask for clarification on things he already understood perfectly, all while giving the impression that he was overwhelmed. Count Blome, feeling intellectually superior and convinced he was dealing with a moron, became overconfident. He saw a chance to score a diplomatic win for Austria and let his guard down completely. He completely underestimated Bismarck's true intentions. The result was the Gastein Convention, a treaty that looked like a compromise on the surface, but in reality sowed the seeds of a future conflict that Bismarck could exploit. By playing the fool, Bismarck tricked Blome into signing a deal that ultimately isolated Austria and paved the way for Prussia's dominance. Blome left the table feeling triumphant and smart. Bismarck left with the strategic upper hand that would eventually unify Germany. He won the war by first losing the battle for who seemed smarter. The psychology here is deeply rooted in our cognitive biases. When we meet someone who seems less intelligent, we don't just feel smarter, we feel safer. Our brain, always looking for shortcuts, defaults to stereotypes. The fool gets categorized as non-threatening, which lowers our cognitive defenses. It's simply easier for the brain to accept a simple narrative, "This person is a harmless idiot," than to stay on high alert. This tactic also exploits what psychologists call the fundamental attribution error. We tend to believe people's actions reflect their character, not their situation. When you play dumb, others are likely to conclude that you are dumb, not that you're acting dumb for a reason. Their ego confirms this. They want to believe they're more intelligent, so they eagerly accept any evidence that supports it. You're essentially feeding their confirmation bias, letting them build a mental model of you that is completely wrong but deeply satisfying to their ego. This creates a blind spot so big you can operate within it almost invisibly. They'll misread your calculated silences as confusion, your strategic questions as ignorance, and your patient observations as passivity. While their mental energy is tied up with self-congratulation, yours is free to focus on the real goal, undisturbed and undetected. So how do you actually use this? The modern world is a perfect stage for this dynamic. In a business negotiation, resist the urge to show off your exhaustive knowledge. Instead of declaring, "My analysis shows your Q3 projections are overly optimistic," try a more naive approach. Ask simple, almost childlike questions. "I'm a little confused by this number. Could you walk me through how you got there again? I'm probably just missing something simple." This does two things. It forces them to explain their logic, potentially revealing weaknesses they would have otherwise hidden, and it makes them feel like the expert, the teacher. As they're busy educating you, you're gathering critical information. In a team meeting where a colleague is pushing a flawed idea, don't get into a head-on intellectual battle. That just makes them defensive. Instead, play the fool. Say something like, "This is a really interesting idea, and maybe I'm too slow to see it, but could you help me understand how we would handle mention a specific, obvious roadblock?" You frame your valid criticism as a personal failing. This lets them address the flaw without losing face. In social settings, when someone dominates the conversation with their opinions, don't compete. Let them talk. Nod, listen, and ask simple questions. "Wow, that's fascinating. What do you think will happen next?" People who are underestimated are often overlooked, but they also hear everything. The next time you feel that urge to prove how smart you are, just pause. Ask yourself, do you want to win the argument, or do you want to win the game? Rule 2. Embrace calculated irrationality. The madman's gambit. The second rule takes us into darker, more volatile territory, deliberately projecting unpredictability to intimidate and control your adversaries. This is the madman theory, a strategy famously associated with former US President Richard Nixon. The core idea goes against all conventional strategic thought. While rational opponents are predictable and therefore manageable, an opponent who appears volatile, emotional, and capable of irrational acts creates a profound sense of fear. This isn't real madness, which is a liability. It's a calculated performance of insanity, a mask of foolish rage worn to break an opponent's will. A rational leader's threats are often dismissed because everyone knows they're bound by self-preservation. Threatening to walk away from a deal might not be credible if the other side knows you have too much to lose. But if they believe you're a madman, impulsive, thin-skinned, and prone to self-destructive fits of rage, that same threat becomes terrifyingly real. They can no longer rely on a logical assessment of your interests because your actions seem completely untethered from them. This forces them out of their comfort zone and into a purely defensive posture. They aren't playing against your strategy anymore, they're playing against your perceived insanity. The goal is to make your opponent believe that the cost of provoking you is simply too high because your reaction will be disproportionate, unpredictable, and potentially catastrophic for everyone. As Machiavelli himself noted, sometimes it is a very wise thing to simulate madness. This calculated folly bypasses logic and targets our most primal emotion, fear. The most famous use of this strategy was, of course, by Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger during the Cold War. Facing a stalemate in Vietnam, Nixon decided to use the madman theory to pressure North Vietnam and its Soviet backers into making concessions. The plan was to make the leaders in Hanoi and Moscow believe that Nixon was so obsessed and dangerously anti-communist that he was capable of doing anything to end the war, including using nuclear weapons. Nixon explicitly told his aide H.R. Haldeman, "I want the North Vietnamese to believe I've reached the point where I might do anything to stop the war. We'll just slip the word to them that, for God's sake, you know Nixon is obsessed about communism. We can't restrain him when he's angry, and he has his hand on the nuclear button." This wasn't just talk. In October 1969, Nixon put this theory into action with Operation Giant Lance. He secretly ordered the US military onto a high-level global nuclear alert. A squadron of 18 B-52 bombers, armed with thermonuclear weapons, flew patterns near the Soviet border for 3 days straight. The move was deliberately designed to be detected by Soviet intelligence. By any rational standard, the action was insane. It risked provoking a global nuclear war over a regional conflict, but that was exactly the point. Kissinger and Nixon wanted the Soviets to think they were dealing with a president who was unhinged enough to risk mutually assured destruction. The message was clear: we can't control him. By projecting this image of a volatile leader on the brink, Nixon aimed to create so much fear that the Soviets would have no choice but to pressure their North Vietnamese allies to negotiate, simply to de-escalate a situation that was spiraling toward catastrophe. While historians debate how well this specific operation worked, it remains the quintessential example of a leader weaponizing the perception of foolish irrationality to gain a strategic edge. The psychological power of the madman's gambit shatters an opponent's ability to make decisions. Humans are predictive creatures. We navigate the world by assuming others will act rationally and in their own best interest. The madman strategy destroys this model. By introducing the variable of irrationality, you overload your opponent's cognitive capacity. They can no longer calculate risks and benefits because your behavior doesn't follow a logical pattern. This creates what Robert Greene calls a suspended terror. The opponent is kept perpetually off balance, unsure of what might provoke you and terrified of the consequences. This uncertainty is psychologically exhausting and creates immense pressure to resolve the situation as quickly as possible, usually by making concessions. This is a form of psychological warfare. We crave certainty, and when that's taken away, we become anxious and desperate for a resolution. The madman offers a simple way out. Give him what he wants, and the madness will stop. It's a strategy that turns your opponent's mind into its own prison, where the fear of your unpredictable actions is more powerful than any rational thought. The entire dynamic shifts from a chess match of intellect to a raw, primal test of nerve, where the person willing to appear the most unhinged holds all the cards. While you probably shouldn't deploy a full-scale madman theory in your daily life, the underlying principle of calculated irrationality can be a powerful tool. This isn't about throwing tantrums, it's about selectively disrupting expectations to regain control. For instance, in a negotiation where you're being consistently lowballed and rational arguments are failing, you might need to introduce a moment of controlled, foolish emotion. After another unacceptable offer, instead of a logical rebuttal, you could react with a surprising display of frustration. Maybe you push your chair back abruptly, fall silent for an uncomfortably long time, and say something like, "I don't even know what we're doing here anymore. This is becoming a waste of time." Your tone isn't anger, but deep, irrational disappointment, as if you're on the verge of walking away not for strategic reasons, but because you're personally and emotionally done. This jolt can make the other side worry that you are truly unpredictable and might kill the deal out of sheer frustration, even if it hurts you. This can force them to offer a more reasonable proposal, just to bring things back to normal. Or think about dealing with a workplace bully who relies on your predictable, polite reactions. If they consistently interrupt you in meetings, a madman tactic would be to do something completely unexpected. The next time they interrupt, just stop talking. Stop and stare at them with a neutral, almost blank expression for a few seconds too long. Let the silence hang in the air. This quiet, irrational response disrupts their script. It's not aggressive, but it's deeply unsettling. It makes them the center of attention in a negative way and communicates that their behavior has broken the flow of normal interaction. The key is that the irrationality must be a performance, a tool you pick up and put down at will to prove that the wisest move is sometimes the one that seems the most foolish. Rule 3. Institutionalize mediocrity to secure your throne. The third rule is one of the darkest and most cynical in the Machiavellian playbook, used not by those climbing the ladder, but by those at the top who are terrified of falling. This is the rule of institutionalizing mediocrity, deliberately surrounding yourself with incompetent, weak, and loyal subordinates to protect your power. A leader who is insecure lives in constant fear of being outshone by a brilliant subordinate. A truly capable number two is a threat. They might win the loyalty of others, expose the leader's weaknesses, or eventually plot a takeover. The foolishly insecure leader's solution is as simple as it is destructive. Surround yourself with people who are even less competent than you are. By appointing loyal sycophants and yes-men, the leader ensures their authority will never be questioned. This creates a protective buffer of mediocrity. The subordinates owe their jobs not to their talent, but to the leader's patronage. Their loyalty is therefore guaranteed since they have nowhere else to go. This strategy creates a system where incompetence is rewarded and spreads throughout the entire organization. The leader's position becomes unassailable, not because of their strength, but because they've systematically eliminated any internal threat. It's a profoundly foolish strategy for the organization's health, but from the paranoid perspective of a weak leader clinging to power, it's the ultimate form of self-preservation. History is littered with the ruins of empires brought down by this very practice. A perfect example is the later Roman Empire during the reign of Emperor Commodus. Following his father, the great philosopher King Marcus Aurelius, Commodus was an heir with none of his father's wisdom or competence. He was vain, paranoid, and more interested in his gladiatorial fantasies than in running the empire. Deeply aware of his own inadequacies, Commodus was threatened by the capable senators and generals his father had put in place. He saw them as personal threats, not assets. One by one, he purged the most competent figures from his court. Experienced governors, brilliant commanders, and wise advisors were systematically replaced by the emperor's cronies, flatterers, and wrestling partners. His inner circle became a collection of yes-men whose only qualification was their unwavering loyalty and their inability to ever challenge him. For example, he appointed his chamberlain, a former slave named Cleander, to a position of immense power, allowing him to sell public offices to the highest bidder. This is institutionalized corruption and incompetence at every level. While Commodus secured his own position for a time, the effect on the Roman Empire was catastrophic. The frontiers became vulnerable, the economy faltered, and Roman institutions decayed. Commodus's reign is often seen as the beginning of the end for the Western Roman Empire, a period where a foolish leader, in his paranoid quest to secure his power, chose to surround himself with even bigger fools, ultimately setting the stage for the empire's decline. The psychology behind this self-destructive strategy is a toxic mix of the Dunning-Kruger effect and deep-seated insecurity. The Dunning-Kruger effect shows that people with limited competence tend to significantly overestimate their own ability. An incompetent leader may genuinely believe they are more capable than they are, and see a genuinely skilled subordinate as arrogant or overreaching rather than as a valuable asset. This is compounded by personal insecurity. The weak leader's ego is fragile, and it can't handle the constant presence of someone who is demonstrably better. The competent subordinate becomes a living mirror, reflecting the leader's own inadequacies. To shatter that mirror, the leader has to get rid of the subordinate. By replacing them with a loyal but mediocre person, the leader gets constant validation. The sycophant's flattery soothes the leader's ego and creates an illusion of competence. It's a psychological feedback loop. The leader feels powerful and smart because no one ever challenges them. The organization no longer optimizes for success, but for the psychological comfort of its foolish leader. While this is a strategy of leaders, understanding it is crucial for anyone navigating a power structure. You have to learn to recognize when this dynamic is at play. Does your boss consistently promote less qualified people who are personally loyal to them? Are independent thinkers and high performers being sidelined or pushed out? Is dissent treated as a personal attack? If you see these signs, you're likely in an environment where mediocrity is being institutionalized. Your own competence in this context is a liability, not an asset. You have a couple of strategic options. The first is to leave. In such a toxic environment, your own growth will be stifled. The second, more Machiavellian option is to adapt. This requires you to play the fool in a different way. You must downplay your ambitions and competence. You have to learn to frame your good ideas as if they came from the leader. Instead of saying, "I have a new strategy that will increase our efficiency," you might say, building on your vision from our last meeting, "I was thinking about how we could apply your idea to this problem. What if we tried?" You make them feel like the originator of the success. You must also perform loyalty and never ever outshine the master. This is a dangerous and soul-crushing game, but in a court ruled by a paranoid king, it's often the only way to survive and wait for an opportunity to either escape, or, if you're truly playing the long game, to eventually take power when the whole rotten structure inevitably collapses. Rule 4. Master the art of underestimation. The fourth rule is maybe the most liberating of them all. You must actively cultivate an aura of being underestimated. This is the art of using the fool as a mask, a disguise that lets you move through the world unburdened by expectation. When people underestimate you, they are giving you a powerful, hidden advantage. They lower their expectations, drop their guard, and make assumptions about you that you can later exploit to devastating effect. The person who is seen as a threat is watched and analyzed. Their every move is scrutinized, but the person who is underestimated flies under the radar. They are free to observe, learn, and position themselves without raising suspicion. This is a core tenet of Sun Tzu's The Art of War. All warfare is based on deception. To seem weak when you are strong, to appear inactive when you are preparing to strike. This is the essence of strategy. By willingly embracing the role of the underdog or the harmless amateur, you encourage your rivals to become arrogant and complacent. Their overconfidence becomes your greatest asset, blinding them to your true strength until it's far too late. A historical figure who perfectly embodied this strategy is Liu Bei, a hero from the Chinese epic romance of the Three Kingdoms. During the turbulent final years of the Han Dynasty, China was fractured by warring lords. One of the most powerful and ruthless was Cao Cao, a brilliant but deeply paranoid man. Liu Bei, a distant relative of the emperor, had great ambition but little power. He found himself serving under Cao Cao, who he knew was both a rival and a potential executioner. Liu Bei understood that if Cao Cao ever suspected his true ambitions, he would be killed instantly. So, Liu Bei put on the mask of a fool. He deliberately distanced himself from matters of state. While other ambitious men jockeyed for position, Liu Bei spent his days in his private garden, tending to his vegetables. He acted like he had no greater ambition in life than to be a humble farmer. He feigned a lack of interest in politics, and when forced to attend court, he appeared timid and unremarkable. One famous story tells of a time when Cao Cao, testing Liu Bei, invited him for a drink and casually remarked, "The only heroes in the world today are you and I." This was a deadly test. A flicker of pride from Liu Bei would have confirmed Cao Cao's suspicions. Instead, Liu Bei was so masterfully terrified that he dropped his chopsticks, just as a convenient clap of thunder sounded. He then used the thunder as an excuse, claiming he was simply afraid of the storm. Cao Cao laughed, his suspicions eased. He concluded that a man so easily frightened by thunder could not possibly be a threat. This act of calculated foolishness saved Liu Bei's life. By consistently playing the part of a simple, unambitious man, he was completely underestimated. This mask gave him the time and space he needed to eventually escape Cao Cao's control, rally his forces, and establish his own kingdom, becoming one of the 3 great emperors of the era. The reason being underestimated is so potent rests on cognitive bias and the economy of attention. People have a limited amount of mental energy. They focus it on perceived threats and opportunities. When you present yourself as neither as harmless, average, or even a bit incompetent, you effectively become invisible to their strategic radar. You're relegated to the background, and this is where your real power lies. While all eyes are on the loudmouth trying to dominate the room, you are free to observe the real power dynamics. This strategy also weaponizes the confirmation bias of others. If someone initially pegs you as unremarkable, they will subconsciously look for evidence that confirms their initial assessment. Your silence will be seen as a lack of knowledge, not strategic observation. Your simple questions will be seen as ignorance, not intelligence gathering. Their ego is invested in their first judgment being right, and you can let them live comfortably in that illusion. This creates asymmetric information. You know your true capabilities, while they operate on a flawed picture. This information gap gives you an enormous advantage. It allows you to prepare in secret, to hone your skills without pressure, and to choose the perfect moment to reveal your true strength, catching everyone completely by surprise. The shock of this revelation is often as powerful as the action itself. The modern application of this is a quiet rebellion against our culture of relentless self-promotion. In your career, resist the pressure to constantly broadcast your achievements. Sometimes, the most powerful move is to let others take the spotlight while you do the work. Let a credit-hungry colleague claim victory for a minor project. While they're busy managing perceptions, you're free to focus on the next, more important objective. When you do eventually make your move on a major initiative, it will come as a complete surprise. In a competitive social setting, don't feel the need to prove your wit. Adopt a more reserved, observant posture. By being a better listener than a talker, you make people feel seen and important. They will project positive qualities onto you, that you are thoughtful and trustworthy, without you having to claim them. This is especially useful when entering a new group. Don't come in with a bang, trying to prove your worth from day one. That only invites resistance. Instead, start quietly. Observe the culture, identify the key players, understand the unspoken rules. Play the role of the humble learner. This period of being underestimated is your most valuable window for intelligence gathering. By the time you decide to assert yourself, you won't be acting on brute force. You'll be making a precise, informed move. Let them think you are just a pawn on the board. By the time they realize you are the player, the game will already be over. Weaponize simplicity in a world of noise. The final rule offers a counter-strategy to the overwhelming complexity of the modern world You must learn to weaponize simplicity. In an age where experts and leaders cloak their ideas in convoluted jargon and dense data, the person who can communicate with disarming clarity holds a unique advantage. This is not the simplicity of a simple mind. It's the strategic simplicity of a master communicator who knows the most persuasive ideas are the ones that are easiest to understand. The appearance of foolish, simplicity can cut through the cognitive clutter that paralyzes most people. While your rivals try to sound smart by making things complicated, you gain power by making them simple. This tactic works because the human brain is inherently lazy. It prefers clear, simple narratives over complex, nuanced ones. A leader who speaks in absolutes and offers straightforward solutions, even if they're flawed, will often seem more confident and trustworthy than one who acknowledges ambiguity. By embracing the persona of the straightforward, no-nonsense fool, you bypass your audience's critical thinking and connect with them on a more direct emotional level. You aren't trying to win a university debate. You're trying to win the hearts and minds of people who are tired of being confused. In this context, the one who seems smart enough to acknowledge complexity is seen as weak, while the fool who offers a simple path forward is hailed as a strong leader. A classic example of this is Harry S. Truman. When he unexpectedly became president after FDR's death, he was widely underestimated. He lacked Roosevelt's charisma and intellectual flair. He was a plain-spoken man from Missouri who seemed utterly out of his depth. The sophisticated elites of Washington viewed him as a simpleton. Yet, this very perceived simplicity became his greatest political strength. Truman spoke in direct, unadorned language that resonated with the average American. He famously kept a sign on his desk that read, "The buck stops here," a simple, powerful statement of accountability. While others debated nuanced policy, Truman framed complex issues in stark moral terms. The Cold War became a straightforward struggle between freedom and tyranny. His decision to use the atomic bomb was explained not with complex strategic calculus, but with the simple, brutal logic of saving American lives. His critics saw this as foolish oversimplification, but for the majority of the public, it was a sign of clarity and strength. They didn't see a fool, they saw a leader who was refreshingly direct. By weaponizing his common man persona and his straightforward communication, Truman built a deep connection with the American people, allowing him to win a surprise election in 1948 and implement some of the most significant foreign policy in American history, all while being consistently underestimated by his more sophisticated rivals. The psychological power of strategic simplicity is immense. It taps directly into our need for cognitive certainty. In a world saturated with information, the brain experiences cognitive overload. When faced with too much complexity, we don't engage in deeper analysis. We often shut down or default to the simplest explanation available. The strategic fool provides that simple explanation. They create a clear, compelling narrative that is easy to remember and repeat. This is the foundation of narrative control. By framing the debate in simple terms, you own the narrative. Anyone who tries to introduce nuance is forced to argue on your terms and automatically appears to be confusing the issue. Simplicity is also inherently persuasive. Studies have shown that messages that are simple, concrete, and emotional are far more effective at changing minds than those that are abstract and purely rational. The fool's simple language often carries more emotional weight. A statement like "we will build a wall" is psychologically more powerful than a multi-point dissertation on immigration policy because it is visual, concrete, and emotionally resonant. It creates a picture in the mind, bypassing the need for critical analysis. This is the art of ideological hypnosis, using simple, repetitive, and emotionally charged language to lull the critical mind to sleep. You can apply this principle to gain influence and cut through the noise in your own life. In a professional presentation, avoid cramming your slides with dense text and complex charts to prove how much work you've done. That doesn't make you look smart. It makes you look confusing. Instead, focus on a single, powerful message. Tell a simple story. Use strong, clear visuals. The executive who can distill a complex business problem into one memorable sentence is the one who will be seen as the true leader. When you're trying to persuade a group, don't lead with data, lead with a simple moral or emotional frame. For example, instead of arguing about budget percentages for a community project, start by saying, "This is about creating a safe place for our children to play." You frame the entire debate around a simple, emotionally compelling idea. Now, anyone who argues against you isn't just arguing about numbers, they're arguing against safe playgrounds. The world is drowning in complexity and noise. The person who can offer a moment of clarity, a simple path forward, a clear and confident voice, that person will hold a power that the smartest, most nuanced thinkers can never hope to achieve. They will be the lighthouse in the storm. We started with a paradox that cuts against everything we've been taught, that trying to look smart is a fatal flaw in the game of power. We've seen how the true masters of strategy, from Machiavellian princes to modern leaders, have turned this conventional wisdom on its head. They understood that real power isn't found in the spotlight of intellectual superiority, but in the shadows of calculated foolishness. We looked at the 5 core rules of this forgotten art. First, to mask your brilliance, letting others feel smarter to disarm them. Second, to embrace calculated irrationality, using a performance of madness to terrify your opponents into submission. Third, the dark strategy of institutionalizing mediocrity, a cautionary tale of insecure leaders who surround themselves with fools to protect their throne. Fourth, to master the art of underestimation, using the fool's mask to become invisible and prepare your strike. And finally, to weaponize simplicity, cutting through the noise with clear, powerful narratives that capture hearts and minds. All of these principles point to one powerful truth. Power is a game of appearances, of managing perceptions, of psychological warfare. The person who wears their brilliance like a suit of armor is predictable. Their armor is heavy, their movements are watched, and their weapons are known. They're playing chess on a brightly lit board. The strategic fool, however, is playing a different game entirely. They're moving in the dark. They have no reputation to defend, no ego to satisfy. Their apparent weakness is their strength, their perceived simplicity is their camouflage, and their silence is their most potent weapon. They understand that real control isn't about winning every argument. It's about shaping the battlefield from the shadows and letting others defeat themselves with their own arrogance. So, the next time you find yourself in a room full of powerful people, resist the instinct to prove you belong there. The next time you feel the urge to correct someone, to show off your knowledge, to win the debate, ask yourself a different question. Are you here to be the smartest person in the room, or are you here to be the one who actually holds the power? One is a performance. The other is a strategy for victory. The choice is yours. If these principles of power resonate with you, consider subscribing for more deep dives into the philosophies that shape our world. The conversation doesn't end here. What's the most effective use of strategic foolishness you've witnessed in your own life? Share your experiences in the comments below. The greatest lessons are often found in the community's shared stories,